Welcome. Welcome to another edition of this leadership conversation series that I've been holding with some amazing leaders, especially those who are in the global development field, right? And today, wow, I am so excited. I am honored to be doing this segment with Sally Helgesen. And Sally, how are you doing, just to kick things off?
I'm doing fine. I'll be happy when winter is over.
Yes, it's almost
And
there.
and we can get outdoors a little more and start seeing friends after the vaccine get
Yeah,
rolling.
yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm excited about that too. So, Sally, again, I'm so excited to be having this conversation. I'm going to kick it off with introductions. My name is Joyce, and I am the president and also founder of Rise Above Coaching, but I'm also an executive leadership coach. And we'll talk about Sally too, who does leadership coaching as well. And Sally Helgesen she is actually an international best-selling author and speaker, and like I said, a leadership coach like myself. And Sally has been ranked number 6 among the world's top 30 leadership thinkers by global gurus. She has been honored by the Coaching Consortium MECO for her transformational influence on organizations and cultures, by the way, chosen by Thinkers 50, which is a really distinguished leadership with list with Marshall Goldsmith, right? And as one of the world's top coach for women leadership. And then Sally's book. Wow, I think I have a copy of mine here on my Kindle. If I can find it, I'll find it and I'll show you. If you have not read Sally's How Women Rise, which has been co-authored actually by Marshall Goldsmith, right? And it became the top seller and has been sold in like 17 languages as well. And Sally, that's one of the books that I initially read when I started getting into leadership, and it really changed me.
Uh,
And we'll talk about that as we're going through the interview. She has other books. She's written The Female Advantage, Women's Way of Leadership. She's written The Female Vision, Women's Real Power of Work. And I cannot wait to read The Web of Inclusion, which is it's been cited by Wall Street Journal as one of the best books on leadership of all time, as it's been credited to bring the language of inclusion into business. So I love that. Sally delivers leadership workshops, seminars, keynote speaking to companies around the world. Sally has consulted with the UN, in inclusive countries, country offices in Africa and Asia, and also led some programs at Harvard, graduate school, Smith College, and she currently lives in New York. So Sally, thank you, thank you. So let's start by, maybe you could start by introducing yourself and your background and what inspires your passion for women leadership and advocacy.
Thank you, Joyce. It's wonderful to be here. What really inspired it in the 1980s, I was working in corporate communications, and I was one of very few women. And I started reading a lot of books about being written at that time for women leaders, or women who were interested in being leaders. And everything that was published in the 1980s basically said, you've got to do this just like a man. Leave your values at home. If it moves, salute it. That was actually a line from one of the books. And, get with the program, and you're not going to change things, and you need to completely adapt. And in the work I was doing, I saw two things. First of all, I saw that things were changing rapidly, and I thought the advice women were being given was really obsolete. And secondly, I saw that the few women that I did see had some great strategic ideas, leadership insights. They were good at motivating people. And I thought, we're getting bad advice. So I really made it my mission to interview some of the most successful leaders in the US at that time who were women, and see what they had in common and get a sense of what organizations, how they could benefit from understanding what women's strategic skills were. So that became the female advantage. And I think because it was the first book that had been published that took that point of view, that women had something to contribute rather than just needing to change and adapt. It became very popular and influential and just led to this wonderful 30-year career I've had in women's leadership.
Wow, wow. I actually love that. The interviews, like you said, and women having a voice for the women.
Right.
So that is so nice. And actually, as we're going into 2021, it's a new year now, right? And hopefully, things are getting better. And perhaps there's still a lot of volatile, uncertain, complex, issues that are going on. Um, so what are some of the self-awarenesses or perspectives personally as a leader are you welcoming into 2021?
Love that question. This morning I opened up my email and there was a Valentine card from a colleague who she put together a sort of picture book of things she found inspiring. And on the front page of it, there was a photo of a road, a beautiful country road, and had a big banner across the road that said, "We're all in this together." Mm-hmm. And to me, that was one of the big lessons of going through a pandemic like this, is we really are all in this together, and that our behaviors and how we live our lives and interact with other people influence everything. We have a responsibility to our fellow human beings, and we are in this together. So to me, this year of 2021 is about rediscovering the strengths in being all that in this together. In 2020, it was a necessity and it was a survival mode. But I think there's a lot of strength there. And one thing I know that I've seen is that being a part of some great networks is what has enabled me to not only get through this period, but really find enormous benefits in terms of my work because of the networks I have. So that's the lesson to me.
Wow, wow. And that was one of the 12 habits that you actually put on in your book, right? It's just the power of networks, and that's why I'm doing this myself too, is leveraging that is so, so critical. And I love the way you phrased it, redesigning our strength, like rediscovering our strengths.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful perspective. So as we're shifting to this, like you just said, this new normal, and the world of work has changed. Look at us doing our interviews, at home. Yeah. The global landscape has changed. I'm sure for you as well, because I think you have a huge impact globally. What are some of the priority leader challenges that you think need to be addressed, and how can you share some insights on how we can overcome some of those challenges?
Yes, I think, I've been working around the world really for 30 years, excuse me, with How Women Rise. That really kicked off because we sold so many rights. We sold rights in places I'd never sold rights before, like Mongolia and Ukraine and Bulgaria, et cetera, which was fascinating to me. But my lesson from that has been the same as my global work has taught me in the past, which is that we have so many of the same challenges. People really do. People around the world, yes, cultural difference is very important. Yes. But when How Women Rise became a bestseller in Japan, which surprised me, and the Japanese publisher brought me over to do a media tour for the publication of the book. And when I got there, what fascinated me was the response that I got from women who had read the book and the interviews I did. Was I kept hearing it over and over. We thought these habits were only habits for Japanese women. We didn't know other women in the world had them. And that really fascinated me. How Women Rise is very much about the habits and behaviors most likely to get in the way of successful women as they seek to move higher. And seeing in culture after culture, those habits being perceived of very similarly has been fascinating to me. So we really have a lot more in common than divides us.
Yeah, that's actually very fascinating to see how we are interconnected. When you said the Japanese women said, "Wow, this is exactly what we go through." I didn't, getting somebody else's perspective. Wow, that is such powerful. And let me and maybe as we are also staying on that point, right? One of your in your book. So, what are some of the female advantages that women bring to leadership positions or entrepreneurship? You know.
Well, this has been, and again, this has been very interestingly consistent since I
Mm-hmm,
did the Female Advantage in
mm-hmm,
1990. That the characteristics of the best women leaders that I saw in that research was, first of all, the women put a very strong emphasis on the value of relationships, not just their own relationships, but they wanted to create organizations in which people could have strong relationships with one another and with customers and clients, very relationship focused, very skilled with direct communication rather than communication up and down a chain of command, which had been, the norm for leaders
mm-hmm.
until that period. Uh, Eagerness to put themselves in the center of things rather than at the top, and bring people in around them and organize their organizations more as webs or networks than hierarchies. uh, Comfort with as opposed to tolerance of diversity. I
Mhm.
saw that women had often been outsiders in their organizations, so they understood in their bones what condescending expectations felt like, but they also, they recognized the kind of value that people with an unexpected perspective could bring. And then a willingness and an eagerness, in fact, to draw on what they'd learned as mothers, as wives, as sisters, um, as as members of their community and their churches or synagogues, willingness to draw on that sort of who they were privately and use it publicly. So in their work. So those were all characteristics. And what's fascinating is that I think they've all become more recognized as leadership characteristics in the 30 years that have gone by. And that's given women an advantage.
Yeah, wow. I love the way you mentioned, um, the hierarchy of how organizations were set up, and instead of them sitting kind of in the center and attracting those relationships. I mean, I didn't even think about it on that perspective, which is super super powerful. And actually, and that also maybe talks about, like you said, diversity and inclusion, right? And what, like, what are some of the shifts and leaders can embrace now to support and fulfill the need for diversity and inclusion? And I know you mentioned that, being,
Mhm.
leveraging relationships, I think, right? Because you can't really do it on your own. Maybe you could share some insights on that as well.
Certainly, the main thing, and I've been working with inclusion and inclusion initiatives in companies for 25 years, even before it got paired with the word diversity,
Yeah, yeah.
which has been, really came in more or less in the late 90s. Which I think is exactly right, because in order to lead diverse organizations, leaders must demonstrate inclusion, or people will feel too left out. So I think there's a very strong reason those terms have become connected. But what I think is most important about inclusion, and what often gets a little bit left out of the conversation, is that inclusion is demonstrated in behaviors,
Mhm.
solely in behaviors, not in statements, not in mission, statements of mission and value, or, pontificating. Inclusion, more than anything, is vested in how you behave, and how you behave to others, whether you listen to them, whether you value them no matter what their position is in the organization, whether you are able to see them in terms of their potential, not just what they actually are contributing. And small practices like where you seat people in a meeting, once we're meeting again
Yeah.
in person, how often you call on different people. All those
Mhm.
things are small behaviors that demonstrate inclusion. And I think that that's not recognized, in my view, sufficiently in organizations, that leaders need to demonstrate inclusion every day, all day long, in their own behaviors and habits. And they need to hold others to account for doing so. And that's what's going to make an inclusive culture. And to me, an inclusive culture is very simply defined as one in which a preponderance of people speak of the organization in terms of we and not they. That's how you know you've got an inclusive organization.
Wow, 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 wow. The we versus I is so powerful. And one of the things that you also mentioned, to add on that inclusion piece is that leadership presence, because if you are not present as a leader, and this is something that I'm so big on, right? You miss the cues, right? You miss the people in the room of sometimes of those who don't speak up, and maybe just asking for, opinion from like the whole group. So that's one of the things that I've found also have become a really non-negotiable for leaders, right? So and it happens a lot because people come in with meetings with agendas all the time, and sometimes you don't, that blocks that whole point of inclusion. So I think that's such interesting, and you have done so many books.
Yeah.
You have traveled, you have met so many. How I was just curious, like who are some of your role models that you have actually looked up to?
The person, and I was just in a conversation about this morning,
Yeah.
I realized looking back how much my career has been shaped and how much I've been influenced by Frances Hesselbein, who was one of the women that I interviewed for the Female Advantage. I interviewed her back in the late 80s when she was CEO of the Girl Scouts. And she was back then she was adamant about diversity.
Mhm.
And it set the Girl Scouts up to take a very different path in the 30 years since then. For example, the Boy Scouts did, which did not have that inclusive orientation. And Frances was widely known. She was on the cover of Business Week. Peter Drucker, who was the leading business guru, said that he thought she was probably the best leader in America. So she was really quite something. And I'd never met anybody like her. I have to say that the mentors that I'd had in my life had mostly been men because there weren't many women doing what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So meeting someone like Frances, who she was very patient, she was extremely inclusive, but she was very tough-minded. And she really knew what she was trying to get and how she was going to try to engage other people to help her get it, her aspirations for the Girl Scouts. And so I realized that she just had a huge influence on me, on my thinking, and also on the people that I met. I've met so many people in the field that I'm in. I feel like I'm really part of a lineage. And that came through Frances. Everybody I've met, practically, with a few exceptions, has been through her. So I would say she's been my pretty consistent role model.
Wow, wow. Well, I was a Girl Scout too, so think.
Me too. I loved it. I had the badges. It was
Yeah. And it's so funny because even that is a global, because actually, I was raised in Kenya and that's where,
oh,
yeah. And I was showing my daughters the pictures when I was a Girl Scout, and they're like, wow, as you were saying, we are so connected
yeah.
more than we think we are, right?
Much
And we
more
gotta
than we can do that.
embrace that.
Yeah.
So, but this was so good, Sally. As we are wrapping up, I mean, you talk about inspirational women, and I could say when I came, I was sat on your workshop that you had with co-led by Fiona, who's the CEO of the Wild Network, who I interviewed last week, and that workshop was a game changer for me. So and that just shows the power of inspiration. And I used to be in the corporate world myself too. And I was like, now I'm going to sit in my power. I'm going to build relationships. I'm going to leverage those relationships. And that's how I got to where I am today. So
Oh,
what are some of the, as we're wrapping up, what words of wisdom can you share with the next generation of leaders that are coming up?
I think the most important things are, first of all, to be very intentional about what you're doing. Whatever it is, it will change. And especially for younger people coming out into the world of work, what you aspire to do now and what you may aspire to in 10 years will change. But whatever it is that you're doing, you want to be very intentional about how you're doing it. And that's one of the things we talked about in that workshop. And once you're pretty clear on your intention, the first question you want to always ask is who, not how, not what, but who. Who can I engage to help me make this a success? And ask yourself those questions. And then how would I engage that person? How do I get to them if I don't know them? How can I frame my request in a way that's going to inspire them to be part of what I'm trying to achieve? And I think that's really the model for it, is being intentional and then thinking always in terms of who. And finally, and you brought this up, that ability to develop a leadership presence is going to be very important. And you develop a leadership presence by being present. Yes. It's not what you're wearing. It's not, whether you carry a handbag or whatever. It is how much are you there for the person in front of you, for your intention, for your task. And that's what is going to, that will give you the ballast you need to move forward.
I love that. I'm going to put that on my wall, the who.
Exactly.
And it is, I mean, this journey is, it's scary. There's just, there's so many moving pieces, but it's such a beautiful journey when you know that you have the support, and you've got this, whoever your go-to person that encourages you, that you look up to and inspires you. So thank you so much, Sally, for sharing your great insights today, and I hope that we can stay connected, especially when the weather gets better.
I can't wait.
I can't wait too. So but thank you for your time today, and looking forward again to sharing this and doing good in the world today.
Yes, thank you, Joyce. I do too.